A news announcement revealed the closing of California's Indy Mac Bank and how it was a grand failure.
Last night, there was an emergency meeting in Washington. The leaders...
In GTX, Bobby Walker gets into an office. Nan, his office assistant, followed him in and told him Sally Wilcox was waiting for him in the conference room. Bobby then went to the staff room and saw everyone was looking sad. He asked them what was wrong, but no one could tell him. So he got up and went to Connell's office.
What happened? Somebody die?
Bobby asked Connell what had happened. Connell told him that they had closed the mobile phone division in Newport News. He also mentioned that they had integrated the ship system with a rail product. Corporate speak for, we're cutting jobs, but making it sound innovative. Bobby then went to Sally's office and asked her what had happened. Sally introduced him to Dick Landry from the legal department. Landry explained to Bobby that the company had made a division change and that they would provide him with benefits to compensate for the 12 years they had worked together.
Your 12 years with us entitled you to 12 weeks full pay and benefits.
Bobby asked if they were firing him. Sally assured him that they would also provide opportunities for further employment services. He angrily asked if Gene knew about their decision. Sally asked him to sit down, but he refused and left the room.
You know what, Sally? Off.
One day he's Bruce Wayne controlling Wayne Enterprises. The next he's Bobby Walker standing outside GTX with a cardboard box. From billionaire to broke, guess even Batman can't escape corporate downsizing. Bobby then started packing up to leave. Bobby's secretary asked what they had said about her job. He told her he hadn't asked anything. At Gene's office, Phil was waiting for him. Gene noticed Phil's demeanor and asked what was going on. His assistant told him that Sally had fired some of the ship system sales group workers.
No, but I've been hiding in here all day.
They closed Mobile and Newport News.
Gene asked Phil if Sally had fired him as well. Phil replied that she hadn't and admitted that he had been hiding in the office all day. Phil shouted, saying he would never let anyone fire him after 30 years of service. 30 years of loyalty gone in 30 seconds. Turns out dedication doesn't come with job security. Back at Bobby's house, Maggie Walker, Bobby's wife, came. Maggie went outside and saw Bobby cooking. She asked him why he was home at that time, and he told her that he was making dinner. Maggie told him they were going to Jack's house that night, but Bobby refused to go. Maggie got upset and went back inside the house. Bobby followed her. They started arguing, questioning why he wasn't going with them and asking why he hated Jack. Bobby then told her that he had been fired.
They fired me today.
Annoyed, Maggie asked about Gene, reminding Bobby that he had promised to secure his job. Bobby told her that Gene hadn't been in the office all day and that Sally Wilcox had made the decision. Amazing how fast "we're in this together" turns into "sorry, nothing I can do." Meanwhile, Phil went to his house. He asked his daughter Susan Rico where her mom was, and she told him that she had a headache. As Phil was about to go upstairs, his daughter called him and told him that they had found out their next trip would be to Italy. She asked if she was going too. Phil told her she would, but he wasn't sure.
I can go, right?
A vacation to Italy sounds great if you still have a job to come back to. Phil went to the bedroom, and when his wife saw him, she asked if he had heard that Colin was fired and whether they were okay. Phil assured her and told her that they needed to get ready for Salinger's dinner, because when your financial world is crumbling, the best solution is a fancy dinner.
Completely forgot.
You don't have to come if you're not feeling up to it.
Just give me a minute.
At the same time, Gene is standing numbly in front of a table, putting ice in his bottle. His wife came up behind him and told him that they had to leave early, reminding him that they shouldn't be late again. Bobby, Maggie, and their children arrived at Jack's home. They went inside and greeted everyone. Jack asked Bobby how he was transitioning from his high-paying Africa job to another one. While they were talking, the birthday lady came in, and Bobby told her that she didn't look 35, but more like a 21-year-old. They both laughed. She invited Bobby to have a drink.
Why don't you grab yourself a drink, Bobby? We got some margaritas in the blender.
At the Man of the Year celebration, the host introduced Gene McClary, Executive Vice President of GTX, as one of its first employees. Gene took the stage, recalling his patience during tough times for the company and praising James for growing GTX into a massive organization. Gene then invited James to the front. James thanked the audience and acknowledged that building GTX wasn't easy, but it was made possible with Gene's help.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Without a doubt, you don't build a company like...
If handing out pink slips by the thousands and then awarding yourself for visionary leadership isn't a corporate villain arc, then I don't know what is. Even Lex Luthor would be taking notes. The next day, Bobby went to a job training. When he got there, Danny met him and asked where he was going. He told him it was an orientation and then pointed him to the room. Inside, a woman told them the requirements for their work and that fear and anxiety were invaluable in a job.
Neighbors, dentists, anybody, and everybody.
Back in GTX, Gene and the rest of the staff discussed the merger of the ship systems and rail products divisions. Phil and Nan joined them as the staff complained about handling the same number of accounts with half the workforce. Phil responded that they were lucky to have jobs in such times, then shifted the conversation to how they could regain the business.
Tell them you're lucky you still have a job.
Bobby exited the orientation and looked for a place to sit. When he found one, a worker told him the seat was taken. Danny then called Bobby, offered him the seat, and Bobby thanked him before sitting down. Danny told Bobby that everyone was frightened of him because he was a new employee.
Yeah, you're not threatened.
NBA?
Yeah.
Bobby asked Danny why he wasn't afraid. Danny told him that he was a confident person. Danny asked Bobby how long he'd stay, and Bobby explained it was a 3 months full salary and 4 months of outplacement. Danny mentioned he had 9 months but had already used 4. It's like a ticking time bomb. How long can you stretch those months before the real panic sets in? Later, Gene and Bobby meet for lunch. Gene asked Bobby how things were going for him and his family, and Bobby told him that everything was fine. Gene told him that they did it because the company was in a serious condition and they had to reduce the staff.
Salinger's under a lot of pressure to boost the stock price before somebody buys in and makes him.
Gene told Bobby that he had called some marketers and called them by name and gave him the paper. Bobby got angry, dropped the paper, and left by telling them he would steal them once he started working with their competitors. Bobby went from corporate loyalty to corporate revenge in record time.
Hey.
Hey,
How'd it go?
great.
At home, Maggie and Bobby talked about his time with Gene. Bobby mentioned Gene was helping him connect with marketers, and Maggie admired it. Holding unpaid bills, Maggie suggested getting a job to help with expenses. When Bobby's father Kevin called, Maggie handed him the phone, but Bobby refused, not wanting to hear his advice.
Wait,
You read about the laughs in the paper.
so what?
At the office, James and Gene reminisced about good times. James invited Gene and Cynthia to join them at Sun Valley for the new year, but Gene hesitated, mentioning his grandkid would be visiting. At home, Gene lay outside when Cynthia approached and asked if everything was okay. He mentioned having lunch with Bobby and expecting him to throw a drink in his face. Cynthia then said she and Sue were planning a weekend trip to Palm Beach and asked for the corporate jet. Seeing Gene's reaction, she quickly added they would take commercial flights instead.
Fine, we'll fly commercial.
Meanwhile, Maggie brought up the idea of selling their house, but he refused.
We're not gonna get started.
He then headed to an interview, driving separately while Maggie took the kids. Bruce Wayne would just buy another mansion without blinking. Bobby Walker, he's clinging to a life he can no longer afford, hoping no one notices. The interviewer reviewed his experience in sales and asked about regional sales, which he confirmed. She offered $65,000 per year for a position outside his area. Angry, Bobby argued he made $120,000 at GTX and applied for VP of Marketing. She replied they had highly qualified applicants, to which he insisted he was one.
I'm a highly qualified applicant for that position.
After this, Bobby went to the office and started calling marketers about job openings, but all responses were negative. Phil Knight built Nike from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. Bobby Walker? At this rate, he'll be lucky to sell sneakers out of his trunk just to cover rent. Bobby then kept calling Sally, leaving voicemail when she didn't respond.
Hi, Sally. Bob Walker. Thanks for not returning any of my phone.
Bobby then went back home. Outside, Drew was sitting alone. Bobby asked what was wrong, and Drew assured him he could handle things as he was growing up. Bobby then told him he had lost his job, but everything would be fine.
I lost my job.
At Jack's house for Thanksgiving, the men discussed business while Fran served food. Jack asked Bobby about work, and Bobby gave a vague answer. Jack mentioned reading that Salinger made 700 times more than the average GTX worker. A timely reminder that the ones at the top rarely feel the pain of those at the bottom. Before eating, Carson prayed, thanking God for their health and asking for her dad to find a job, exposing Bobby's unemployment to everyone. Jack offered Bobby a job, but he refused.
Could always use some extra help this winter. Hanging drywall.
Meanwhile, James and his business partner discussed financial losses, considering selling the new business or closing the existing business. They ultimately decided on layoffs. Gene privately told James he disagrees with the decision, but James dismissed him.
I've always told you what I thought, right or wrong, and this is wrong.
Of course, the first solution is layoffs. Not executive pay cuts or restructuring, just cutting the workforce. Later in bed, Maggie and Bobby discussed finances. Maggie mentioned that if they lowered their house price, they could sell it for $850,000. She questioned why Bobby refused Jack's offer, and Bobby insisted he wouldn't work under him. At this point, pride is the only thing Bobby has left, and he's holding on to it for dear life. Jean and Sally are also on the bed. Jean asked her about the criteria for downsizing. She then got annoyed and left him in the bed.
Sally.
Bobby and his teammate went golfing, but Bobby is told he didn't pay for his membership. He then went to Maggie to ask what was going on. Maggie explained they couldn't afford the upcoming month's payment and urged him to stop golfing and find work to pay the mortgage. Bobby wanted to appear successful, but Maggie reminded him of their reality and asked him to cancel the golf plans. Nothing says fall from grace like getting kicked off the golf course. Later, Bobby and Maggie had a heartfelt conversation. Bobby expressed hopelessness, shouting that at 37 he couldn't afford to support his family. Maggie reassured him, saying everything would be fine and that his family was there for him, offering a comforting hug. Bobby attended the job interview. The interview mentioned a great recommendation from Dan Mass. The position has a $90,000 salary plus commission and bonuses. The man told him that even though he can't promise him anything, with Dan's recommendation and his resume, he seems like the right person for the job. Finally, a lifeline, or so it seems.
With Dan's recommendation and your resume, you seem like the right fit for the job.
But when he called later to ask about the job, he was told that it was not available anymore. Later, Bobby, heartbroken, watched as the person he sold his car to drive it off. First the golf membership, now the car. Bobby is watching his old life disappear piece by piece. At a party, Phil approached Jean and revealed that Sally had fired him. Jean went to his office and confronted Sally, who handed him a paper saying he was also fired. Jean and Phil discussed their long dedication to the company, feeling betrayed. Jean went home but ignored his wife's calls to go upstairs. Meanwhile, Phil started a new job on the factory floor at Joanna's office, surprising Bobby and the team. Joanna asks Phil a question about whether he smokes or not. When he tells her that he smokes sometimes, she tells him to quit. He then leaves for the office.
You're pushing 60 and you look like hell. You're gonna have a rough time out there.
Bobby goes to Phil's new office and talks to him about the separate office, saying the company has to pay extra. Phil replies that this is the least the company can do for him. Phil then asks Bobby about the dress code, and Bobby tells him it is fine to wear casual clothes. At home, Bobby talks on the phone with a mortgage company. He tells them that he spoke with someone from their office last week, and they said he hadn't paid for this month. However, if they want, he can write a check and send it to them. Maggie joins him from upstairs and listens to the conversation while smiling. After he finishes the call, she asks him who he was talking to, and Bobby tells her it was the mortgage company.
Which one, American Express?
Maggie tells Bobby that Yvette asked her to work tomorrow night. Bobby replies that it's New Year's Eve. Drew joins them and asks Bobby if he can drive him over to Kyle's. Bobby tells him he is busy. Disappointed, Drew goes back upstairs.
Halo? Should play some Xbox.
Oh, hey, Bobby, hang on a sec.
Maggie explains that Drew doesn't have an Xbox anymore. He gave it back because he knew they couldn't afford it. Nothing hits harder than a kid quietly sacrificing something they love because they see their parents struggling. Bobby then goes back to Jack's workplace and asks if he can get a job.
I need a job, Jack.
He then started working that same day. Bobby starts carrying timber as Jack works in construction. Bobby gets tired and Jack tells him to carry 2 more. He has played a billionaire and a business mogul. Now he's a guy struggling to carry a 2x4. That's some real-life character development. They sit and eat their lunch in one of the rooms they are working on. Bobby sits separately looking at his hands. One of Jack's workers approaches him and tells him that the gloves he is using are new, which is why he got blisters. He then gives Bobby an old pair of gloves. A small but powerful moment. Bobby isn't just learning the job, he's learning humility. The next morning, Bobby goes to work where he is sandblasting. They tell him to add another sack to the mix because it is too thin. Jack looks at Bobby and sarcastically comments on how easy the job is, like moving cost reports from the outbox.
Insane on it.
Meanwhile, Jean and Sally are at their house. She asks him what his plan is for today and tells him that Ed and Dana, her old friends, have invited them to dinner tonight. Phil goes for an interview. When he introduces himself at the receptionist tells him to sign it and take a seat. There are many applicants, and the line is long. Jack gives Bobby a paycheck. Bobby sees that there is an extra $200 and asks Jack about it. Jack replies that it may be a mistake and tells him to keep it.
Must have made a mistake, Bob.
Jean goes to dinner with Sally and her old friends. He seems unhappy but pretends to be enjoying himself. Jean still playing the role of a man who has control, when in reality, he has none. Bobby and his family move into Bobby's parents' house. Bobby goes to Drew's bedroom, where Drew is lying in bed with his earphones on. Bobby takes off the earphones and asks if he's okay with sleeping in the same room as his sister for a while. Drew says it's fine. Once, he bought sneakers without looking at the price tag. Now, he's deciding which ones to sell just to get by. Phil Knight would be disappointed. Liam, Jean's son, and his family come to Jean's house. Jean and Liam talk while Billy's family plays outside. Jean tells Liam that he is trying to get a vineyard in June and is also looking for a job. Liam asks Jean if he has talked to his mother. Liam then tells Jean that she is thinking of selling the house and is having a rough time.
She's having a pretty rough time. She's talking about selling the house.
Bobby goes to work. Mike isn't there, and Bobby asks where he is. He is told that Mike was busted again for assault and drunken and disorderly conduct. Bobby then told Jack that he knows someone who can work for him. Following this, Danny joined the team and started working. Danny, another casualty of the job market, now picking up a hammer instead of a briefcase. Jean went to a bar and found Phil drinking. He asked to drive him home, but Jean told him he couldn't go home because his wife doesn't want the neighbors to know he has been fired.
Want to go to the movies?
Meanwhile, Bobby returned home and his mother told him someone named Fred Munder called and offered him a position. Even though the job is in Boston, Bobby decided to go. Maggie is skeptical, but Bobby told her the job is vice president of sales and marketing. And that is exactly the job he fits in.
This is it. This is me. This is my job. I don't know what else I can look for.
A vice president title again? Sounds like a dream, except dreams don't usually come with fine print. Like they say in Argo, this is the best bad idea we have. Bobby went to Boston and stayed in a motel. In the morning, he went into an office for an interview, but he is told his appointment is actually for next week and not this Friday.
You say you have an appointment?
Yes, at 10.
I don't see it.
Phil meets James for lunch. He brought up his job opening about foreign executives and he was interested, but James told him that he can't hire anyone above 30 for this job.
I wouldn't hire anyone over 30 for that job. It's a killer.
Apparently, decades of experience mean nothing if you're on the wrong side of 30. Later that night, Jean found Phil angry, throwing stones at the GTX building from afar. Phil told him of his financial stresses, but there is nothing they could do. Back at his house, Phil washed the dishes. He then went to his garage and smoked before getting in his car. He closed the garage door, started his car, and unalived himself with carbon monoxide poisoning. The next day, Jean, Bobby, and the others attended Phil's funeral. A devastating but all too common end for those who feel like they've lost everything. After this, Bobby and Jean walked in the first place they worked at. Jean reminisced about the old days, but now everything is gone.
Now everything I spent 30 years trying to build for myself and everybody else is...
Bobby then went back to his house and apologized to Maggie for letting her down, but she told him everything would pass.
Yeah, I did.
The next day, Jean went to GTX to talk to James and asked why he didn't attend Phil's funeral. But James instead talks about Phil's wife. Jean asked why he fired his employees if the company was good, but James insisted what he did was for the good of the company.
We did what the market required of us to survive.
Back at his house, Bobby received a call from Jean about a job. Later that day, he went to see Jack and told him that Jean offered him a job, but he is thinking of staying with him because he prefers this job. Jack then told him that he better take the job because he is a bad carpenter.
You should take that job. You're a shitty carpenter.
Jean, now who has opened his own company called McClary Maritime Associates, is sitting in his office. Sally walked into the office and congratulated him. She asked if they could have lunch, but Jean rejected the offer. As she leaves, she asks to consider her for possible associates.
Keep me in mind for a possible associate.
With new energy, Bobby walked into his office and greeted the employees. He then immediately started giving orders and got to work.
Don't complain about the luxury accommodations here.
Bobby, back in the corporate world, but this time with a different perspective.
We work as hard in here every day as we did trying to get a job. We're gonna be all right.